About a decade ago, the language of politics in this country was about the minorities, how to protect the minorities. And that meant, frankly, how to protect white people from black domination. You fast forward to now, 10 years later, you hardly hear anybody in this country talking about the minorities, what will happen to the minorities. You probably have the Freedom Front, which is a conservative white party, which is about the only party that talks about the minorities. So there is a sense in which there has been a normalization in that sense of South African politics. So there is no questioning also of whether white people belong or do not belong in this country. I mean, that's just besides the point. It's irrelevant. The real fights and battles are legitimate ones around privilege, around who has access to what, around affirmative action as a way of correcting for the past. But those are legitimate public policy disputes that do take on racial dimensions.
It's kind of hard to get a sense of neighborhoods because everyone's behind huge walls. But, certainly if you go to the big, what were once almost exclusively malls where you'd see white people, you now see a mixture of people. It's far more cosmopolitan. How do you feel as a South African when you see that kind of thing? How does it make you feel?
Well, I mean, South Africa is still a very divided society geographically. Frankly, we have done almost nothing to integrate this country physically. And it's only those, of course, who are able to escape the townships and the villages, who have been able to move to the suburbs and to hide behind those four walls. But what that has done, unfortunately, it has led to a social division in this country where you have one group of people, the elite basically, with their own values about democracy, about the rule of law, about all the nice things. And then you've got another world which is preoccupied with a whole different set of priorities about hunger and poverty and joblessness and hopelessness. This is South Africa's main challenge. How does one group, the elite, who claim all these values and virtues, speak to the people who are actually on the outside, who have no hope, who have no jobs, who go every day basically trying to make it? This, for me, is the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges facing South Africa, is the legitimacy of the elite in both political and economic terms.
And would you classify the elite? Would you categorize the elite as black and white at this point?
We no longer have a white elite as we did in the past. Obviously, whites are still a disproportionate percentage of the elite. But the elite has become increasingly deracialized. So we are speaking to a very large extent of a non-racial elite now that has become increasingly separated and divorced from the mass of the people in this country.
And how do you feel about that? Are you disappointed about that? 15 years later that more wasn't done? Hasn't been
it's an indictment on the elite, and I belong to that elite, and the intellectuals, the business people, the politicians. It's an indictment on all of us that as soon as the gates opened, we left our townships and our villages as fast as we could, leaving those places without any leadership. Well, there is leadership, but obviously the more people leave, especially educated people, the more serious the problem of leadership is in those areas. So yes, it is an indictment on all of us who have become part of the non-racial elite. The Mandela promise was never an elite promise. The Mandela promise was a promise of social justice, of equal opportunity for many of those people who now remain trapped in the shacks, in the townships. And this is a promise we have failed to fulfill. Those of us who have been able to appropriate the Mandela promise to our own ends. But the Mandela promise is much more egalitarian than it has turned out to be. The real danger is the winter of discontent. The real danger is when we lose all legitimacy in the eyes of the people we have left behind. I mean, the classic example of how this division is affecting South Africa is Jacob Zuma. Those of us who are among the elite speak a great deal about the rule of law, how Zuma should be subjected to the rule of the courts, and all of those things, which are fine. But Zuma then, in the eyes of the people who are left behind, also becomes a hero, the underdog, the person they feel they need to defend against the political, the judicial, and the economic establishment. That is why, despite all of Zuma's faults, he still gets millions and millions of people who follow him. It's simply a function of the social division that has developed in this country. Sympathies around Zuma are, to a large extent, a reflection of the class division that has widened in this country over the past 15 years.
So, to sort of boil down to the essence, and you've said this in different ways many times already, is it's really a class distinction now. It's not about race, as you said.
Look, I mean, race is still a big element of South Africa. It's impossible to speak about South Africa without race. Race still matters in this society, but what has also come into the picture is the widening division within the black community itself. So it's a combination of race and class and gender and geography that are playing themselves out with of course, a greater number of people, still black people, still trapped basically in poverty, and black women to a large extent.
Why is there this huge disparity between, the rich and the poor? What wasn't done properly, and what needs to be done?
It's a failure of leadership. I think that we lost the plot after Nelson Mandela. That the leadership of this country was captured literally by the World Bank, by the IMF, by big business, by a whole lot of people that it felt it needed to please, that it felt that it needed to abide by policies that in effect widened the income inequalities, that deepened the poverty in this country. So it's a combination of a failure of leadership, but also of bad public policy. What needs to be done is exactly what is happening in the United States, where after 8 years of a mess, a society finds a way to get itself out of that mess. I'm not sure this is going to happen now with Jacob Zuma, but it could happen in 2014, which is our next elections. It could happen the year after. After all, we're a society like any other society. We'll just have to find a way to get ourselves out of this mess.
I mean, as a black South African, are you proud 15 years after where South Africa's at? Would you say you're proud of what's happening?
I'm proud. Look, given the history of this country, given the experience that I and many people went through, I'm proud that we fought for this freedom and attained it. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of Nelson Mandela and all the people who contributed to our freedom. I'm disappointed by what we have done with that freedom, by our failure to live up to the Mandela promise.
Which was, again?
Which is an egalitarian promise to afford as much opportunity to as many people as possible in this country. And what we've done, particularly the elite leadership, is to appropriate the benefits of our freedom to ourselves. And that's the great indictment of our elites.